On December 20, 1925, Alphonse Capone goes back to New York to bring his son, Sonny Capone, to our operation for a mastoid infection. He packs clothes and a couple handguns. The operation is a success, however, Sonny is deaf. He goes back to his parents' house and connects up with old pals such as Frank Yale and Albert Anastasia. Frankie takes him out for a meal and later is taken for a gangland tour in Yale's bulletproof car.
Is taken to the Adonis Club. It is closed and Capone is showed around and told it is owned by his old pal Joey Adonis and his Broadway mob. Suddenly, the door bursts open and guns are pulled. You see, Joey thought his club was being broken into, however he realized, and hugged his old pal. The club is painted black at the ground floor and yellow on the second floor, with a family living upstairs.
Capone is offered a job by Mr. Adonis as he hands Capone a pistol. Adonis then states, "I know you are the right man for the RAF Snorky." In Capone's first few days, Al encounters no problems, making him contemplate moving back to New York. White Hand Mob vs. Black Hand Mob. While Bill Lovett, shown here, was the leader of the White Hand Mob and was killed on November 1st, 1923 after being shot in the neck and chopped with a cleaver in the head. He was found on 25 Bridge Street. Pegleg Lonigan, shown here, is now leader of the White Hand Mob, with his sister being married to Wild Bill Lovett. He had one leg and was brought in 14 times and convicted once only. On December 20, for Pegleg Lonigan and his pal Needles along with Aaron Harms entered the Adonis Club. They sat in the corner with Pegleg smoking a cigar and Harms with a toothpick in his mouth. Needles took the hand of a woman and started dancing, and soon Pegleg and Harms joined with a broad on their arms too. Lonigan sat back down and began snarling and puffing away and made remarks such as Dagos and Wops. Capone, being from out of town for such a long time, didn't recognize Pegleg and his rivalry with Frankie. However, Capone was a tough guy and walked over to Pegleg and said, "This establishment isn't for you. I will leave." Pegleg snarled and paced out with his men. Capone noticed something was wrong and he was dangerous, so he left the club too. He went to Frankie Yale, who was outside his house in his car, and Frankie told him about the long-standing rivalry. Pegleg returned around the same time. Alphonse left his Adonis Club and flooded the club with 8 of his henchmen and demanded to see the big fella. The club was mostly empty and Lonigan fired shots in the air to clear it further. At the same time, Frankie and Capone took a trip to 2nd Street to see Albert Anastasia and Giuseppe Fiorino, who were 2 young killers with 20 hits under their belts. Frankie's call then went out to all of the heavy hitters who were Italian and frequented the Adonis Club, and his advice was simple: stay clear of the Adonis Club the next night on Christmas. The next day was Christmas, and everybody celebrated and ate and drank with their families. However, Capone and Frankie were with their other family. It was their crime family. They discussed what was to occur at night. Albert and Fiorino were already outside being trigger happy. They couldn't wait to whack Pegleg and his mob. Albert sped around the block and stopped at a certain candy store, which was to become a hotspot for the Murder Incorporated faction of the mob in the future. Capone discussed and plotted with an agreement being reached that Anthony Desso and Joe Howard being the doorman for the night. The plan was in motion. The day went by and 10 p.m. arrived. The room was quit and about 8 people were in the club, and Anthony Desso and Joe Howard sat in relaxation and dozed off. They awoke to noise outside of loud cars pulling up. They peered outside, and it was Lonigan, Needles, and Harms all in separate cars. Lonigan entered drunk and exclaimed, "Why is this club full of Dagos and Wops?" The patrons were mortified and became silent. Outside, Albert and Fiorino saw the cars and raced around the block to a phone booth and called Alphonse and Yale. They raced back around to the Adonis Club and met Capone and Frankie. Inside, Lonigan went to the piano and started beating the player. Suddenly, the lights shut off and everything went pitch black. The lights came back on, and Lonigan is shot to death in the neck without even being able to pull out his .38 revolver. Harms was also shot to death as shown in this picture, slumped next to his pal. The table was overturned. Both were also shot in the face, with Harms shot after Lonigan. Needles was shot and dragged out to the gutter and chopped out with an axe. He was left to be found by enforcement with half of his face gone. On December 26, 8 men were brought in for questioning for the murders of the White Hand Gang, but all were bailed at $5,000 or $10,000. Capone then returned to Chicago with another hit under his belt. And like that, the White Hand mob was finished, and Frankie Yale was left to rise in the national crime syndicate.